I want to ask you is why did you start the Asian Highway?
It's kind of a loaded question. I'll try to make this as non-political as possible because there was a political motivation to it. It was basically it started back in 2017, but right before that, basically in my career as a journalist, I've been a journalist for 15 years now, and I didn't feel like there was enough representation of Asian Americans, specifically Indian Americans, in the space I was in. And so it started with trying to find an opportunity to give Indian Americans and Asian Americans a broader voice, a seat at the table, so to speak. And then the election of 2016 happened, and I felt that that need for a voice was even more elevated. It wasn't necessarily about taking a side politically as much as it was just, again, having a voice and making sure people had an opportunity to speak about their experience and their story. And so the Asian Highway was born accordingly, and I spent the past 5 years building it as a platform that's both podcast based and article based. There's a couple other plans in the works in the next year or two with live events once COVID's over. But yeah, it started basically as a platform to give Asian Americans and Indian Americans a broader voice and a seat at the table. And we now have 3 podcasts in live production right now on a variety of issues that's achieving its missions of giving a voice to the people that need it, and a steady dose of articles covering a wide range of things from film to sports to news to the environment. Again, all with the mission of giving people a voice.
That's fantastic. So talk about some of the challenges that you faced on starting the Asian Highway up. What were some of the difficulties that you had to overcome in starting this online platform?
Sure. I think the first part was the first challenge was building a vision and a mission that resonated with people. I mean, it's easy to have an idea of like, hey, I want to try podcasting, or I want to try a show, or I want to try my hand at writing, or what have you. But then to kind of take that idea and to mold it into something that resonates with an audience, and then to build an audience after that, I think that was the first challenge that we had in starting this was what is the vision that we could build that makes us feel like we're giving that voice that we have, but also resonates with the audience that we're reaching out to. And so that was the first challenge we had. And I think once we got over that hurdle, then it was, all right, how do we implement this? How do we execute the plan? We spent the people who helped me get this started, we spent about a year figuring out the vision and mission and putting that into plain words, and then launching the actual venture of like, all right, here's how it looks like, here's the website, here's the kinds of stories we'll be covering, here's how the podcast will be executed, here's how it evolves over its lifetime. So those are the first 2 things, and then obviously trying to get this thing funded is the next challenge. But as time goes on and you find your voice and you find your audience, some of those challenges start to dissipate. Now I have people approaching me for funding and to provide advertising, which was something we didn't have at the get-go. So now it's a lot of those barriers that we first had in terms of building an audience and getting funding. A lot of those challenges are now starting to dissipate. Now there's other challenges now in terms of growth, and how do we grow and how do we maintain our audience. But those are new challenges that we're now equipped to handle and meet. So, but yeah, I'd say building the vision, building the audience, getting funding, and that's a standard challenge that most people in my position would face. So we were no different in that, and I think we've done a good job of handling that.
That's fantastic. Excellent. With you're an entrepreneur. What are some of the things that keeps you motivated? When starting up the Asian Highway, and now, what keeps you motivated to continue to keep producing content?
I think the one common thing I found, and this applies not just to the Asian Highway, but also to my work as a journalist as well, with other places I've been at, it's reaching an audience and being able to communicate something that resonates with somebody. And for me, I guess my gold standard is as long as I could reach one person with everything I do, be it a story I write, a podcast episode I produce, a video I put out there, whatever the content that I create, if it could reach at least one person and make a difference in their life somehow, some way, I've done my job. And so that's what every day I wake up, that's literally one of the first things I think about. It's like, what am I doing today to make a difference in someone's life? Because that's basically the point of all the platforms, Asian Highway or otherwise, that I've been a part of. It's I'm making a difference, and so how am I touching the lives of people who consume what I write, what I produce, what I put out there? And there have been countless stories that have done just that. I have a lot of people who have reached back out to me, and I've seen results of the stuff I've either written or produced. And so, what motivates me is to continue doing that. Like I know I could put stuff out there that actually resonates with people, and I love that challenge of finding the next thing that's going to make a difference in someone's life.
Fantastic. What has influenced you most in a career towards journalism? Because you started off actually studying law and being a lawyer. And what was it that you where you made the switch and decided to kind of make the switch and go from law to writing?
Yeah, it was kind of the happiest of accidents because journalism was never part of the plan. I obviously had to go to school to be a journalist. I went to school to be a politician. I mean, that politics was my life dream as a kid. I keep telling people when I was 5 years old, I told myself I'd be the first Indian American senator from California. Now, of course, someone else already took that title. She's now our vice president of the United States. But that was my childhood dream was to be a senator representing California. And when I came to Syracuse College, I signed up to take political science classes. That was my major at UCLA. That's why I went to law school. I literally spent the first 20-some years of my life building a career towards politics, not so much law, but politics. And I guess along the way, I did it. I wasn't enjoying the life that I thought I wanted to live, professionally. And so by mid to late 20s, I wasn't enjoying where I was at, so I started looking for another career. And I thought back to one of my days, some of my days in school, and the one thing I realized I was good at was that I had plenty of stories of me writing and succeeding at writing. And so I thought to myself, well, maybe I got to find a way to make a career out of writing. And so I started contemplating, well, I also love sports, so let me see if I could pursue a career as a sports writer. And that's what happened. I got my first job in journalism as a boxing writer, and then I got another job freelancing as a basketball writer. And so I spent my first year in journalism covering sports, and I fell in love immediately. And again, it was never part of the plan. It was literally, I was not happy with where I was on the law and politics side of things. And I just wanted to change. And I literally thought back to my days in college and high school, and like I loved writing, and so let's make a career at this. And I gave it a shot, and that was in 2005, and here we are 16 years later. I've made a life out of it, and I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. It's definitely where I belong.
You've also worked for different publications throughout your career.
Yes.
I know in Orange County, you've also worked in LA. Talk about some of the different publications that you've written for, and what were some of the most interesting stories that you covered? Sure.
Another loaded question, so I'll try to be as succinct as I can on this. So yes, I've covered, just to give you the broad 30,000-foot view first, I've covered sports, politics, I've covered Bollywood, I've covered Hollywood, I've covered politics locally and nationally, I've covered the environment, I've covered healthcare, I've covered education, and now I cover real estate. And the Asian American experience, and so that's kind of where I'm at now. So I've covered a lot of issues, and I think some of my most memorable stories are I guess three. They go in three buckets. One is sports, one is entertainment, and the other is environment. And so I'll start with the environmental story that was most memorable. It's a very quick story. Newport Harbor Yacht Club once had this little thing where they had a thing on the water that would attract seals, and they put up these nails surrounding it to prevent seals from coming on board. And so I wrote an investigative story about how this was what the club was doing, and the federal government got whiff of my story, and they penalized the yacht club for breaking federal law. And so it was kind of interesting, and it made me feel good, like, hey, here's a group of people who were harming the environment in one way, and I wrote a story about it, and there was action taken, and talk about making a difference. That story made a difference. Entertainment, I got to interview a lot of celebrities. That was kind of fun. I think some people I've interviewed. Actually, I'll give my favorite interview. It was with Bryan Cranston of Breaking Bad. I was actually interviewing him on the set of Breaking Bad, and it was on camera. And my first question, I decided to throw him for a loop, and I said, "Hey, as Walter White, did you learn how to make crystal meth for real?" And he got a character, and he started giving me a 15-minute lecture on how to make crystal meth. He's acting in the middle of an interview, which is great. But my favorite story of all time, and it was probably the story that made my career. Not as a story, but as a mindset. And I started my career covering basketball, and I got to interview Kobe Bryant. Mm-hmm. And the first time I interviewed him, somehow I must have impressed him, because at the end of the interview, he put his arm around my shoulder, and he started talking to me, and he was like, "Hey, what's your name?" I told my name. I was like, "What do you do? What do you want to do?" I told him I want to be an impactful journalist, and he told me I remember his words were, "Don't ever let up, be relentless, be a junkyard dog. Go out there and be a junkyard dog, and get your stories." And that was back in 2008, and I've never forgot those lines ever since. And he had seen me a couple of times since then, and he reminded me of his words. He made sure I never forgot. And I don't think I would have been a journalist as long as I have if it wasn't for what he told me. A lot of people will be like, "Hey, you got to interview Kobe Bryant." And yeah, that's great, but it was the words that he gave me that kind of set the foundation for my career. And so hands down, that's probably the one story that will stand out for me forever.
I had no idea you had interviewed Kobe and had that experience. That's fantastic. Yeah, that's amazing. That's wonderful. It's definitely one thing that stands out. I'm sure for you, and always will. And Kobe had such a huge impact. Even after his death, you're kind of just starting to realize that.
Right.
Which is amazing. I want to shift gears and kind of talk about your time at Cerritos. Mm-hmm. What teacher or staff member at Cerritos had a big impact on you?
I could specifically remember two. And the fact that they're still heavy in my mind, 26, 27 years later, I guess it shows you just how much influence an instructor can have on your life. Because I similar to the Kobe story, I don't think I could have gotten anywhere past college if it wasn't for these two professors specifically. Her name was Mary Jean Pierkowski. She was the chair of the physical therapy department. I'll give you context of how I met her, because I never had a class with her, but she was still very big on she's probably the most influential in my life at Cerritos. And the other was Joseph Vandermodel, who was a philosophy professor. I'll start with Joseph. I had him for 2 classes during my time at Cerritos, and he did a really good job of keeping me focused. We would have talks after class in his office. So it wasn't so much what he did in class. It was a time that we connected after class. He had a sailboat. There were times we'd go on a sailboat, and he would just give me perspective on how things fit in within the greater context of life. So just the conversations that we had about why things mattered and how to kind of keep focused on things despite what's going on around you. I mean, I remember at the time there were a lot of interesting things happening politically and socially at the time. And he did a very good job of keeping me keeping the noise outside. Don't worry about these things here. Here's how you break it down, and here's how you can kind of fit within the context of your life. And so he did a great job of giving me just great direction in life. Mary Jean, she was, like I said, she was the head of the PT department, but she was also the chair of what was called the curricular committee. And that committee kind of set the tone for the classes that were offered every semester. I was appointed to be the student rep of that committee back in 1994. And she gave me the freedom to be really active on that committee. And by working that committee, actively, as active as I was back then, she kind of took me under her wing, and she was also a Bruin. She was kind of the person who kind of guided me to get into UCLA, and she guided me past that as well. So even when I was at UCLA, I'll talk to her once a week and say, hey, here's what I'm experiencing. Here's kind of what I'm going through on campus, good or for better or for worse. And she would give me great advice of how her time at UCLA was 30 years earlier. And so she remained active in my life well beyond Cerritos. I mean, we've kept in touch for decades since. And so, the life guidance that both her and Joseph gave me both during and after Cerritos College, guided my life to no end. And what they offered me is priceless. And so there's no way I could have done what I've done without their advice and guidance.
Great. What makes the 2-year college, community college, 2-year college experience so different and so special in your mind? And how did your time going through classes at Cerritos, you probably talked about this already, but how has it kind of helped you, guide you through, through your personal life or through your career?
Sure. I think to start with the broad point of view is, I think the fact that it's a community college, there's a certain community feel to it because of the nature of the school, the way it's set up. So I remember when I was at Cerritos, I felt like I had a community behind me. It wasn't just like I just wasn't a random face on a campus. I mean, by comparison, when I went to UCLA, and I remember my first class I took, I mean, I was sitting in a lecture hall of 500 students. And had I been through that as a freshman instead of a junior, I might have got lost, And so having that nurturing community around me, I think was great. And that's something I think you only found either at a 2-year or a liberal arts type school. But for me, I think I needed that community, because I don't think I would have been able to survive at UCLA in terms of, knowing, I mean, by the time I got to UCLA, I had 2 years of college underneath me. So at least I understood how not to get lost in the system or on a big campus. And so that was like the first layer, I think, for me. And I think the other parts of it, like, classes are smaller, professors take more interest, at least the ones I were around took more interest in the students. Those factor in as well. So I think there's certain elements of the attention you get at a 2-year school. And then on top of that, it's affordable. And it also, to me, also helps break college down. It's not a daunting 4-year experience. It's like, okay, I go 2 years here, get focused, get my classes done here. And then by the time I'm done and ready to transfer or move on to my next phase of my life, that transition is a lot easier than, say, going from high school to that other phase. And so I think just it helps with transitioning, and it helps with finances, and it helps build, to me it helped build confidence. I don't think the confidence I had coming out of Cerritos College was second to none. I definitely didn't have it come out of high school. And so that was a value for me for being at a 2-year school. And I think that would happen at any 2-year. But Cerritos College, being also in the city I grew up in, and the friendships I made there were also great too. So that was specific to Cerritos. So yeah, it's a combination of community and confidence and attention.
Talk about your experience at UCLA and how that transferring from Cerritos to UCLA, how being at UCLA and the campus like that helped you with law and helped you with journalism.
First, a little context. I actually finished Cerritos. I was a year and a half. I didn't even do a full 2 years. I finished the transfer curriculum in a year and a half. And so when I transferred to UCLA, I was technically still a sophomore. So I transferred mid-year. Most people would have transferred in the fall quarter. I came in the spring quarter. So my transition was a little weird because I was in the midstream. And I remember getting to campus in the middle of the school year. And everybody's got their friends already. Like the school year's got a flow to it, and I'm starting at the end of the school year because spring quarter is the last quarter of that academic calendar. So my initial transition was a little tough because I'm like, whoa, I'm basically on my own. I mean, everybody's got their routine, and I'm here starting brand new, fresh. And I had those large classes of 400 students, what have you. And so the first quarter was a little bit of a daunting challenge. But by fall quarter, I kind of found my rhythm. And I think the one thing that UCLA kind of factored for me was it opened up a lot of doors for me. And I think that was kind of the thing that they kept telling you even on campus of like, as long as you go through this, you go through the curriculum and you finish your program, the doors that this school opened for you is pretty amazing. And that was true. As I moved on from UCLA, there were jobs that were offered to, or at least were presented to me only because I was a Bruin. I remember one person in particular. He ran a big firm over in Hollywood, and he went to UCLA, and he directs his human resources. Like anybody that applies for a job at his company that went to UCLA automatically gets an interview. I mean, that just whether you're going to get jobs is a story, but at least you got an interview just by virtue of going to UCLA. And so I think just the doors that were open to me, it made me appreciate going there even more. And again, I wouldn't have got there had it not been for Shrew's College, because I had the path to get to UCLA from there. And so I think that was probably the thing I appreciate the most of that campus is the opportunities it afforded me. And I also made a lot of lifelong friends. I mean, a lot of my friends I have today, 20 some years later, are also fellow Bruins. And we have our own networking, and we do things for each other as well. So the networking and the opportunities were second to none.
We have some questions that were sent in using our sign-up form. I'm going to go ahead and ask you some of those. The first one is from Alicia. Mm-hmm. What do future journalists need? What skill do they need to work in multimedia journalism now?
I think they need to wear multiple hats. There was a time where you could be a specialist in journalism. You could be not so much a one-issue person, but you could be like known as a sports writer or a film writer or a political writer. Nowadays, you have to be able to write, do video, take photography, do a podcast, handle social media, do an IG story, do a Facebook story. Like the amount of things you have to do just to be level, it's almost insane. But that's the reality of today's multimedia market in journalism is you have to be able to do a lot of things. So my advice to anybody who's studying journalism right now, or anything that's in the world of communication, is know how to be able to communicate in many different forms. Today you have to write something, and then you have to write either long form or short form, depending on the medium you're writing, be it social media or an article. Tomorrow you may have to do video. The day after that you may have to do a podcast, so it's audio. But that's the point, is you have to learn as many ways of communication as possible, because the audience now is so fragmented and consumes their information in so many different ways. The more ways you could communicate, the more likely you will reach a larger audience.
Our next one is from Desiree. What gave you courage to follow your dream of ultimately becoming a reporter? Many of us like the stability of a basic job to pay bills, so it's hard to sacrifice security for goals sometimes.
Oh, Desiree, I don't know how to answer that question. That's probably one of the toughest questions I've ever had. I mean, sometimes you got to be unconscious and not think about things. And I think that's where I was. I didn't think about it. I'm like, to me, I guess I put myself in a position where I didn't have a choice. It was either I pursue my dreams or I'm unhappy. That was literally that was my mindset when I started doing this 15 years ago. It was that black and white for me, and it was worth the risk because I didn't want to be unhappy. And I believe, and I guess also I believed in myself. I knew someday things would come together, and trust me, there were days I was like, I wanted to give up. I didn't think it was going to work. I had plenty of those days early on. I took on plenty assignments for no pay. I mean, I don't have any shame in admitting that. There were plenty of times I just did things for free because it had a longer play for me, and lucky for me, I guess fortunate for me, it worked out. because I stuck with it. And I guess that was always my thing. And I guess what's one thing I learned from my days covering Hollywood was the actors, for example, who made it were the ones who waited. They were patient. They didn't give up. They just kept waiting and waiting and waiting and doing and doing and doing. And there's something to be said about being patient and playing the long game. And that's what I did. I was patient. I played the long game. And, now here I am. I'm doing my own venture. I'm working at a major publication. This is a job I would not have got 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But I got it now because I stuck through with it. And, now I'm secure. Now I'm stable. I've got a great setup now. But it took understanding that the position I'm at now would take a long time to get there. So you have to find a way to hustle and make it work and never give up. And I think that's what it was for me. It's like, yes, I was insecure and I had times where I was worried if I'd make it to where I want to be, but you have to believe. And as long as you don't stop believing, and you keep working hard, you keep working smart, you will make it. That's just that's worked out for me, and it's worked out for plenty of others ahead of me. And I think it's a formula that will continue to work for others as well.
Our next question is from Beverly. What role did internships play in your career advancement?
My first internship was working as a music scout at a record label in Santa Monica. The record label, they were the record label that managed Jill Scott. If anyone knows who Jill Scott is, she was kind of the new Erykah Badu of her time. And so that was my first internship. And the person who owned the company at the time, it was an investment company, was Michael Jordan. And the reason I bring all this up is because it introduced me to people who they had multiple fingers in multiple ventures, and they taught me the value of finding different ways to make things work, and basically how to hustle. And so I think working at that internship, for example, gave me the mindset I have now of like, I could have a job, that I could do this, I could do this. So like right now I'm doing Austin Business Journal, I'm doing a podcast, I'm doing an online publication. The fact I'm doing those things all at once, I think came from that first internship when I saw successful people, not just doing one thing. They're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. And I've had other internships along the way that showed me similar, game plans of you don't just have to focus on one thing. I mean, you can if you want to, but there's also a path to doing things. You could do multiple things that make you happy. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. And I think seeing people do that in the internships that I had, in the late '90s, early 2000s, I think that was the lesson I took away from those internships.
With working now in Austin versus working in LA and being a journalist in Austin, what are the big differences between the two when you're covering a story? Are there different challenges, or is journalism pretty much the same kind of routine or game, regardless of where you're writing from?
I think it's a mix, really. It's a bit of a mix. There are elements that are the same, obviously, because there are certain things that are standard in journalism. Sourcing and ethically pursuing your stories. Those things don't change wherever you're at. But the nature of the people you meet and the kinds of stories that are presented to you are different. The storylines of the people I met in LA are vastly different from the storylines of the people I meet here. And so, yeah, I mean, just the connections I'm making here are the vibe of their lives. It does differ from the people that I meet, that I work with in LA and in SoCal. That's because they're just different stories to tell. I mean, so the approach to the stories are the same, but the way you tell those stories, the way you connect with those people, differ slightly because of the personalities of both towns. I hate to say this, there in LA, there's a sense of what can you do for me. There are a lot of people that would only interact with me or with journalists in general if there was a specific end that they could fulfill. Whereas here, I'm meeting people who will step up and give me if I'm struggling with the story. People come to my aid and say, "Hey, talk to this person," and they'll make connections for me and show me the way. That was something I didn't experience in LA. So it's a little bit of a nuance. Again, it's not better or worse. It's just different. So yeah, the ways the stories are told and the way you interact is a little different, but the career approach is the same, if that makes sense.